He didn't cry at the wedding, but he wanted to. Not because it was a sham, not because of the whispers, but because, deep down, he could already feel the silence crawling into his chest like cement. Ezra stood beneath the floral arch, his hands cold despite the Texan sun burning through his dark suit. Across from him sat Aurora Morel, her wheelchair discreetly framed by white roses, her face expressionless. A painter once vibrant with color, now dressed in quiet gray. Her hands folded like a sculpture left unfinished. They said their vows in front of a town that only cared for appearances. A wedding not born from love, but from crisis. Because Ezra's father had died, suddenly, tragically, and the company that bore his name was crumbling in his absence. Margaret, Ezra's mother, had always valued survival over sentiment, and when the numbers turned red, she reached for a solution written in ink. Aurora Morel, daughter of a construction magnate, was known for two things: her art. In the fall that changed everything. A second-floor accident left her paralyzed. Rumors said she refused all suitors, refused to be pitied. And yet, when Ezra's mother proposed a strategic alliance, Aurora agreed. Ezra wanted to say no. He wanted to tell them he was gay, that he had never and would never love a woman the way they demanded. But Margaret Harper wasn't a woman who left room for honesty. She held secrets like a weapon, and one night, she used them. "If you back out," she warned him quietly, "I will tell the press everything. I will ruin what little name you have left in this town." Ezra said yes. He said yes to the suit, to the ceremony, to the cold champagne that no one drank. He said yes to the sofa in the guest room where he would sleep that night, and many nights after. He said yes to the distance between them, to her silence, to his fear, to a house that felt more like a gallery than a home. Aurora didn't speak much. When she did, it was brief. "I don't need love," she told him on their wedding night, rolling herself into her art studio and closing the door behind her. She painted for hours, every canvas a storm she never verbalized. Ezra stayed in the living room, the TV glowing in silence, his body stiff, his heart heavier than it had ever been. The days that followed were gray. Ezra threw himself into work, a highway project outside San Antonio, and came home late, sometimes pretending he had meetings just to avoid being in that house. But one night, everything changed. He returned from work, the house dim and quiet. As he passed by Aurora's closed studio door, he heard a soft voice. Not hers, a man's voice. He paused. Through the small gap in the door, he saw her face lit by the glow of a video call. And on the screen, a man. Tan skin, sharp eyes, a quiet smile. Ezra didn't hear much, just one sentence before the door clicked shut. "You really went through with it, huh?" the man said, his voice low. "You did it for us." Ezra stood frozen in the hallway, not from jealousy, not from suspicion, but from something deeper, recognition, not of the man, but of the feeling, that raw longing, that secret bond. Aurora hadn't married for love either. And just like that, the silence cracked. Ezra returned to the living room, but he didn't sit. He stared at the dark window, his reflection blurred, and for the first time since the vows, he wondered, who exactly had he married and who was really watching him from the other side of that screen to follow the rest of Ezra's story, and the man who would change everything? Subscribe to Heart Story now. Part 2 will leave you breathless. Ezra didn't ask her about the man in the video. He should have. The question burned in his chest for days. But they weren't that kind of couple. There was no space in their marriage for questions. Only arrangements, politeness, and carefully managed silence. So he stayed busy. He worked longer hours, spent more time inspecting site foundations and poring over architectural revisions than necessary. He came home late, took the long way from the garage to the front door. Even the echo of his footsteps inside felt like an intrusion. But one afternoon, as he walked into the house, Aurora was waiting. She was sitting by her studio door, her wheelchair turned toward him, one hand resting on her lap, the other holding a hammer. "I need help hanging a piece," she said. No preamble, no small talk. He nodded. She led him to the far wall of the studio, where a massive canvas leaned against the frame, chaotic reds and deep grays, abstract yet violent. As Ezra took the hammer and moved toward the wall, the back door creaked open. Ezra turned, still holding a nail between his fingers. A man stepped in, tall, broad shoulders, skin sun-warmed and weathered. A trimmed beard framed his jaw, and a satchel of rolled papers hung across his chest. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, landed on Ezra like a hawk spotting something unexpected. Then he smiled, slowly, deliberately. "So," the man said, "you're the one who married my sister? Interesting." Ezra froze. Aurora barely looked up. "Eli," she said, as if she'd forgotten to mention him. "He's staying for a while." Eli Morrell, the twin brother Aurora rarely spoke of, had returned from New York. Once a rising star in architecture, he had vanished from the family spotlight years ago, choosing distance over drama. Now he was here, as if summoned by something unspoken. That evening, the three of them shared dinner. Or rather, sat around the same table, picking at food in overlapping silences. Aurora spoke little. Eli, however, watched Ezra with quiet precision. His questions came without warning, not rude, but surgical. "What kind of engineer are you again? What made you say yes to all this? Were you and Aurora close before the wedding?" Ezra answered as best he could, short, honest, but incomplete. He knew this wasn't small talk. Eli wasn't making conversation. He was measuring him. After dinner, Ezra stepped outside to breathe. The air was cooler in the garden. A soft hum of cicadas draped the night in rhythm. Eli joined him, leaning against the wooden railing. "She doesn't need a husband," Eli said, not looking at him. "She needs a shield." Ezra turned. "A shield," Eli exhaled, folding his arms. "Someone to keep the vultures at bay, the family, the media, the ghosts." They stood there in silence, the tension thick but not hostile. "I don't know why you agreed to this," Eli added, voice lower now. "But if you hurt her, even by accident, I'll make sure you regret it." Ezra didn't answer. He couldn't, not because he was afraid of Eli, but because part of him already knew. He wasn't going to hurt Aurora. He was going to fall for the man standing next to him. It started in the garden. Ezra had never cared much for flowers, but Aurora's backyard, untamed, half-forgotten, had a quiet gravity that made him stay longer each evening. At first, he used the excuse of repairing the walkway or replanting overgrown shrubs, but soon the work became less about fixing and more about avoiding the rest of the house. Eli was often there, with sleeves rolled, hands in soil, sweat collecting along his collarbone. He didn't talk much at first, but when he did, it wasn't about small things. He spoke about buildings in Brooklyn, about how light moved through glass, about the weight of silence in homes that were never meant to be homes. Ezra listened more than he spoke. Yet with Eli, he didn't have to perform. There was no script, no pressure to be the perfect son, the obedient husband, the quiet shadow behind Aurora's wheelchair. One afternoon, as they trimmed vines creeping up the side wall, Eli paused, wiping dirt from his palms. "She used to love a girl," he said quietly. "Her name was May." Ezra looked up. They were 17. May came over every weekend, brought her sketchbooks, shared a toothbrush. Our parents knew, of course. They just didn't admit it. He fell silent for a beat. One night, our father came home early, caught them on the balcony. He didn't yell, just told her to get out. Then, hours later, Aurora fell. Second floor. The railing was old, or maybe pushed. We'll never know. But she's been in that chair ever since. Ezra felt his stomach twist. Suddenly, the studio's locked door, then the quiet defiance in Aurora's voice. All of it made sense. She hadn't given up on love. Love had been taken from her. After that day, the air shifted. Eli and Ezra began sharing coffee in the mornings, arguing over architecture in the afternoons. They disagreed on everything: concrete density, roof pitch, even the placement of stepping stones. But there was laughter. Honest, unrushed laughter that made Ezra's chest ache for reasons he didn't name. Aurora watched them without judgment. She stayed in her studio, door open now. Sometimes, she asked Ezra if he was going out for the weekend and encouraged him to clear his head. He didn't know if it was permission or a quiet goodbye. The night it happened. Ezra had just returned from a project launch event. He'd had too much champagne, too many forced conversations. The kind of night where every compliment felt like a performance. It was nearly midnight when he pulled into the driveway, headlights cutting across the gravel. Eli was on the porch, sitting with a beer, as if he'd been waiting. "I thought you'd stay out longer," Eli said, rising. "Was going to," Ezra replied, "but I realized I didn't want to be there." They didn't speak for a while. Then, as Ezra turned to go inside, Eli stepped closer. The moment stretched. There were no words, just breath, and then lips. It wasn't careful. It wasn't soft. It was the kind of kiss that felt like an answer to a question no one had dared ask aloud. For 1 second, time collapsed. Then they broke apart. Ezra's heart pounded. Neither of them said anything. And behind the curtain of the upstairs window, Aurora stood watching. The next morning, Ezra found a folded slip of paper tucked into his wallet. No name, no decoration, just her handwriting. "If two people love each other, don't stop for me." It wasn't bitter, it wasn't angry, it was release. The knock on the front door wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, like the ticking of a clock that had been waiting too long. Ezra opened it to find his mother standing on the porch. Margaret Harper wore her Sunday best, but her face was sharp, eyes colder than he remembered. Her heels didn't click against the tile as she entered. They struck. She didn't hug her son. She looked past him, scanning the house as if expecting damage. "I heard you've been avoiding my calls," she said. Ezra closed the door behind her. "You made it clear what you wanted. I didn't see the point." Margaret turned to face him. "Well, I'm here to remind you. There's a dinner next week with the mayor's family. His daughter is graduating from Yale. You'll attend. Alone." Ezra blinked. "What?" She didn't flinch. "You'll start preparing for a proper divorce. Quiet, clean. You'll sever this ridiculous agreement and make yourself available for a real union." He laughed once, bitter. "You mean a useful one?" She stepped forward. "Don't forget who pulled your name out of that financial grave. I gave you this chance. Don't make me take it back." But that wasn't all. Margaret's voice dropped lower. "I know about Eli. You think people don't talk in this town? You think the Morell family, after all they've built, will let their name be dragged through the mud by some, affair between brothers-in-law?" Ezra's throat tightened. He said nothing. In the next room, Aurora listened from her studio. She didn't speak. Not yet. Later that night, the storm moved further in. Aurora's uncle, the executor of the Morell family trust, arrived unannounced. A man of polished shoes and polished threats. He sat across from Aurora with folded hands and told her plainly if she divorced Ezra and allowed her brother to be publicly involved with him, the trust would be frozen. Permanently. Every asset, every painting, every cent. "The foundation your parents left," he said calmly, "was built on legacy. Not scandal." Aurora didn't cry. She simply asked him to leave, but his words lingered. Eli heard the conversation from the hallway. That night, he paced the kitchen for hours, and in the morning he was gone. No note, no call, no explanation. Ezra searched every street, called every number he could find from Eli's old business cards. Nothing. For 2 days. Silence returned to the house like fog swallowing the land. Then came the breaking. Ezra walked into Aurora's studio. She was finishing a new piece, another storm of oil and canvas. He stood there, trembling. Then, in a single motion, he knocked it off the easel. The glass cracked loudly. The frame hit the floor. "I never asked for any of this," Ezra shouted, voice shaking. "Not the marriage, not the lies, not the guilt. And now he's gone. And I can't even tell him why I said yes." Aurora didn't move. Ezra fell to his knees among the shards, hands in his hair, breath caught between sobs. And then something broke open in her. She rolled forward, her fingers trembling. She reached for him, not to pull him up, but to ground him, to let him know she was still there. "You don't know how long I waited for you," Aurora whispered. "Not to love me, but to free me. I've been trapped in this house, this name, this painting of a life they wanted me to finish." Her voice cracked. "I don't need a husband, and I never wanted a wedding, but when you came along, I thought maybe someone else could stand with me, even for a little while." She reached out, gently touched the edge of a broken frame. "Go after him, Ezra. Don't let them take the last part of you that's still yours." Outside, the garden waited. The wind was changing. It began with a press conference. No one expected it. No one was ready. But when Aurora Morel rolled into the gallery hall that morning, black suit, eyes clear, canvas behind her veiled, every reporter in Texas turned to listen. She didn't waste words. She announced the annulment of her marriage to Ezra Harper, not as an act of betrayal, but of liberation. "I entered that marriage knowing exactly what it was," she said. "Not a union, but a shield. And I'm grateful for the time we stood behind it together." Then she pulled the veil. Behind her stood a painting unlike anything she had ever exhibited. Two men, not detailed, but unmistakably framed, walking through a garden drenched in color, hand in hand. The light in the image came not from the sky, but from between them. "I'm done hiding behind canvas," she continued, "and I'm done living in the ruins of other people's silence." From there, she did what few would dare. Aurora officially declined her right to the Morel family trust. Every asset, every clause. She signed it on stage, in front of the cameras. Then, with that same pen, she revealed something more personal: the founding of La Maison Libre, an independent organization designed to support LGBTQ youth in conservative communities, funded entirely by the proceeds of her own artwork. "I never believed in love," she said, her voice steadier than ever. "But I believe in freedom." And those two met. They reminded me that sometimes freedom is the most radical kind of love. The clip went viral overnight, but Ezra didn't watch it on a screen. He watched it from the doorway of the gallery, standing beside Eli. Yes, Eli had returned, quietly, unexpectedly. He had come back the day before, not to reclaim Ezra, but to return the house keys. Yet the moment Aurora called his name from the stage, everything shifted again. In that moment, none of them were running anymore. 6 months passed. There was no suit, no veil, no priest, no stage, only a garden and chairs facing the morning sun. Ezra stood at the end of the aisle wearing a simple linen shirt. Eli waited beside him, his hands steady, eyes soft with something braver than pride. Guests sat among the flowers, some still unsure of what to call this gathering. But Aurora knew. She sat beneath the old oak tree, a glass of red wine in hand, watching as the vows were spoken, not as promises, but as choices freely made. No one clapped, no one cheered. They simply listened, because for the first time in a very long time, something in that town wasn't built on duty or fear. It was built on truth. And at the edge of the garden, a small brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight. It read, "For all the stories that weren't allowed to bloom." Aurora smiled quietly to herself. "I've finally finished the painting," she whispered. "What does freedom and love mean to you?" Tell us in the comments, your words might be the light someone else needs. If this story moved you, subscribe to Heart Story for more stories that fight shame with truth and silence with beauty.